Our second video on language, and we're going to discuss why is English related to other languages? Let's get to it. Okay, let's start with some terminology first. We've talked about language families before. What is a language family? It's a collection of languages through a common ancestral language. Now, what I didn't mention before and I will mention now is that this existed long before pre-recorded history. So we've never heard the actual tongue. So an example of this is Indo-European, which I've discussed before. Now, let's break it down now to a language branch. Now, this is the same exact definition, except that this language existed several thousand years ago. And within the Indo-European family, we have a language branch called Germanic. Now, we can break that down even further into a group, all right, which is, again, a collection of languages within a branch now. These languages share a common origin, or grammar, or vocabulary, or all three. And they're relatively recent languages that have been spoken. An example of that is West Germanic. If we break it even further down and grab a language out of there, well, guess what? One language that we can grab out of the West Germanic group within the Germanic branch, within the Indo-European family, is the language English. Wow. I know it's crazy. We're going to talk more about these language families, groups, and branches in the language tree more in class. All right, let's focus on a couple different language families. We're first going to start with Indo-European. Now, the Indo-European language family can be broken down into 8 different branches. Now, the 4 most commonly spoken ones are Indo-Iranian, Romance, Germanic, and Balto-Slavic. Now, as you can see, these language branches are broken down to certain areas or regions where they're most likely found. The 4 less spoken branches are Albanian, Armenian, Greek, and Celtic. But again, we're going to focus on the 4 that are most commonly spoken throughout the world. Let's start with the Germanic branch. Now, English is part of the Germanic branch, and many of you might be asking, how is English related to German? Great question. It actually is. It's structurally similar. What I mean by that is vocabulary-wise and the way we word our sentences. Now, where the Germanic branch came from, where English came from, well, it originated from Germanic tribes that invaded England about 1,500 years ago. Now, the grouping that English can be found in is the West Germanic group of the Germanic branch, another subgroup. Ugh, I know, crazy. All right, let's focus on another one, Indo-Iranian branch. Now, this is the branch with the most speakers within the Indo-European family. This branch includes more than 100 languages, and only some are listed in your book. This can be divided even further into an Eastern and Western, the Indic and Iranian languages. As you can see by the map, it makes sense why one is more Eastern than the other. Look at your map. All right, Balto-Slavic is the next branch we're going to discuss. Now, all the languages within the Balto-Slavic branch derive from a mother language, if you will, Slavic. Now, what started to happen is that the dispersion of people who spoke Slavic, well, they moved north, south, east, so on and so forth. What started to happen is that this language developed due to isolation, and now it actually can be traced to different languages. But nonetheless, it comes from the Slavic language within the Balto-Slavic branch. All right, another branch, the Romance branch, which many of you might actually be familiar with. Now, the Romance branch evolved from the Latin language about 2,000 years ago, and the 5 Romance languages are Romanian, French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. Again, something you might be familiar with. What's interesting about the Romance branch is that you can actually find these languages in the same boundaries they are spoken about 2,000 years ago to even today. And the main reason why is because, well, the physical landscape blocked many people from traveling between these countries, and thus a little bit of isolation occurred as well. All right, now we're going to focus on how did Indo-European become so expansive? How did it become the most popular language family? Well, there is something called a Proto-Indo-European tongue. This is before the Indo-European. However, nobody can really prove it or really agree upon what happened. There's actually 2 theories to how this language family spread. One is the nomadic warrior thesis, which is a military one in which nomadic herders that came out of present-day Kazakhstan essentially conquered lands and spread their language around. Then we have the other theory, the sedentary farmer theory, which basically stated that farmers within the Anatolian Peninsula, or aka Turkey, spread agricultural practices from one region to the next, and because they spread these practices, thus the people who learned the agricultural practices had to learn the language, and thus the language spread because of these agricultural practices. Whether or not which theory is correct or not doesn't really matter. Nonetheless, Indo-European has absolutely diffused across space, essentially across the world, and also what has helped that's not on this slide is globalization. Okay, that's it. Some brief information on language families, groups, and branches. We're going to talk much more about these in class. I will see you then.